This happened when I was younger and in college. Thusly, I went to parties a whole lot more often. My university, though quite a large one in a bustling college town, was practically set out in the middle of nowhere. While most of the parties were held on campus or in town, occasionally some really wild ones would be held off campus. Those generally had more drug use or things like that going on though. They were safer to hold out in the middle of nowhere because you were less likely to bother neighbors and therefore much less likely to have the police called on the party for any reason. I had heard about one such party from a frat buddy of mine. He said it was being given by a friend of his in a house that his rich parents owned. They were going to be out of the country for a while, and he wanted to throw the most memorable party he possibly could. I couldn't make it as early to the party as he was leaving, so he told me he would just give me the directions so I could drive myself out there. My buddy gave me what I guess he thought were good directions, and even drew a little map as well with how to get there. Apparently, it would take at least an hour of driving, which I was really not looking forward to. I definitely was not rich, and owned an old car that I was always afraid would break down on me at some point. Still though, I told him I would be there all the same. It was already dark outside when I left, but it wasn't too late at night yet. To make matters even worse, it seemed like there was a storm fast approaching. It wasn't raining quite yet, for which I was thankful, but there was plenty of thunder and lightning in the sky. I hated driving in the rain, so I tried to drive a little faster, hopefully to get to the party before the storm fully broke. I was having a really difficult time finding a way to this place though. I knew that supposedly this guy's house was up on a hill somewhere. It was supposed to have been built with a log cabin sort of look to it. It was a vacation home that was barely even used. I guess it was so far out because when they did use it, they wanted to have a feeling of being isolated from the world. There were several times I thought I might have missed the turnoff to head in the right direction. It was hard to see the street signs when it was so dark with no lights. Also, a few times there weren't even any street signs, just roads that wandered off onto a random hill. I kept wondering if the one I'd just passed was the road I was supposed to turn on. I started to think that maybe my frat buddy was not the best guy in the world at giving directions. I finally pulled off on a random road that I was sure was not the right one. The reason I'd done this was because I'd been driving for way too long, and I was absolutely sure I'd missed the turn now. I thought I should backtrack a little bit to make sure. To do this though, I needed somewhere to turn around. I figured I would find a driveway somewhere, pull in and out real quickly. No sooner than I'd begun driving on that hill, the rain finally began to pour down, and it began pouring hard as well. Great, that was just what I needed to happen. It was already dark and hard to see on this road, but it became nearly impossible to see anything after that. My headlights were just as much of a hindrance as they were helpful. I kept on driving and driving down this small road, not coming upon any driveways or homes at all. At some point, the road was becoming so small that it might be impossible to make a 3-point turnabout even. That was when I noticed something just up ahead of me. There was a gate blocking the road. I had no choice but to stop at this gate. However, looking at this road, it looked like it widened just enough right before the gate itself so I could make an effort to turn around. Right then though, I was suddenly startled by a pounding at my window. I turned and saw a man standing outside my car door in the rain. He was wearing a raincoat and carrying a flashlight as well. I couldn't see much of him because he was shining his light right in my eyes. "Hey, you're not supposed to be here," he yelled at me. "Get the hell out of here." I kept trying to maneuver my car around, and now it was even more difficult with him blocking the way. He just kept screaming at me to get out. He kept pounding his fist on the window as well. I thought that was bad, but when I had the car half turned around, my headlight shined into the trees on the side of the road. I could see 2 more people in raincoats, hiding amongst them. They didn't look very pleased, and I was sure they were carrying guns as well. That set my panic up much higher. "Get the hell out of here!" the man kept yelling, and believe me, I was trying. It wasn't easy though. I was so scared I didn't care if I hit the guy or not. When I got my car around as much as I could, I turned the wheel as sharply as I could and hit the gas. It took a moment, likely because the dirt road was so wet, but I was finally able to pull away from this scary man and his friends. I drove off of that road as quickly as I could. When I got back to the main road, I was thankful as hell to be off that hill. I decided to just skip the party and head back to campus where I was sure I would be safe. My frat buddy wondered, of course, why I'd never made it. I told him what happened, but he didn't seem to believe me for whatever reason. He thought I'd just decided not to go and was making up excuses. I've told the story several times in his presence, but he never seems to believe me. I grew up in the same house for my entire childhood. My parents had bought it before I was born, and they lived in it all the way until they passed away. Right now, my siblings and I all share ownership of the house, although no one currently resides in it. I had my own bedroom growing up too. It was great to never have to share a room with someone else. Sometimes though, it could be a little bit scary to have one's own room. And this story was the scariest thing that ever happened to me in that room. I do remember though that although I always had my own bedroom, I changed rooms with my younger sister at some point. My parents didn't tell us why they were making the change at that time. On occasion, I would get a really uneasy feeling when I was alone in this newer room. It would come out of nowhere and just linger on me for a bit. It wasn't ever anything serious though. When I was 16 years old, I was laying in bed reading. When I got too tired to do any more, I turned the lights off and tried to get to sleep. When I did this, however, that uneasy feeling I would sometimes get came back in full force. For some reason, I had this desire to go and open up my closet door and check in there before going back to bed. It was a little nighttime ritual I had not done in a long time. Normally after I did so though, I would drift off to sleep with no problem. Obviously, nothing was in the closet when I checked. I went back to bed and turned my lamp off. I laid on my side, which is how I usually slept, facing the window, which looked out into the backyard of the house. I immediately jumped out of bed and screamed as loud as I could. There was someone standing in the backyard, peering in through my window. I couldn't make them out perfectly, but I could see the top half of a human face from the nose up. Whoever this was, they were looking right at me. I switched on my lamp, but by the time my eyes adjusted, the man was already gone out of sight. My mom and dad both came running into the room, asking me what was wrong. I explained what happened to them, and they almost seemed relieved. My dad told my mom that he would go and check out the backyard just to be sure. I wasn't sure what he meant by that. Finally, my mom told me why it was she had switched rooms with my younger sister. Apparently, for a long period of time, my younger sister had complained about some guy watching her from the window. She never saw his full face, just the top half of it, but she always knew he was looking at her. Whenever my dad would go out and check the backyard though, there would never be anyone there. My parents had chalked the experience up to my younger sister's imagination. They thought if they switched bedrooms, the bedroom I was previously in was on the second floor, that my younger sister would stop imagining things. After switching, she never mentioned a person looking into her window ever again. That was years and years before this happened, and because of that, my parents eventually forgot about it. My dad came back and confirmed there was no one in the backyard. They asked me if my younger sister had ever told me about this before, and I told them she had not. I had never even suspected such a thing of happening. They seemed a bit doubtful, but also freaked out that this had happened again. When I asked my younger sister about this later, she definitely remembered it. She had been much younger when it had happened. but that face was still burned in her memory. I never saw that person again after, and we're not entirely sure what was going on in our backyard. Well, this is probably the worst thing that happened to me in my life. It happened to me when I was simply going out for a walk. I live out in the mountains in a very nice house, and I enjoyed very much taking walks in the wilderness. On this day, I got some water and a little food for a snack in my bag, and set out to go for a walk in the woods. Now, I've done this many times before, so it's very hard to explain what happened. To this day, I still can't even quite find the words to explain it. I was very familiar with the territory I was in. I don't know how this happened, but somehow I took a wrong turn somewhere. I really had absolutely no memory of how this occurred, but I began to notice the wilderness was a lot different than what I'd noticed before. It didn't take me too long to realize I'd gone the completely wrong way. I turned around and tried to backtrack to the area I was familiar with, but turning around and backtracking didn't work. If anything, it made things a lot more difficult for me. Even when I was going back over what I thought was the area I'd previously gone through, I wasn't sure that I really was. Nothing looked familiar, and I became very worried I'd made several wrong turns since then. It didn't take long for me to admit to myself I was completely lost, and this was a very bad place to be lost in. With the mountains and forests and everything in this area, getting lost could be a real death sentence. I wasn't too worried at first though. I hadn't been out for a very long time, and I felt I could still quickly find my way back to an area I was familiar with. As time went on though, I found I was not going to be finding my way back home so quickly. I think the more I tried to zone in and find an area I was familiar with, the more I found myself getting lost. As the day got later and later, and I kept not recognizing a single thing, I really began to worry. The biggest fear was when it got dark outside. Despite having no idea where I was already, I knew there would be for sure no way I was going to find my way home in the dark. I didn't have a flashlight on me either, and it would be difficult to see much of anything. As it got darker, I knew I would have to try and settle down for the night. I tried to find some place that would be safe and warm, but that was obviously hard to do as well. I just found the best place I could and realized I would have to hunker down. This was going to be quite a horrible night, and it really was. Being cold and alone and lost was truly terrifying. I had never had to sleep on the ground before like this. Mostly, I was stuck thinking about how I would be able to get home the next day. I slept very poorly that night, as one might expect. Either way, I was happy to be able to have light again in the morning. I set out, hoping I would be able to find my way to somewhere, anywhere, even a simple road or path. This quickly proved that it was not going to be a winning strategy for me. The second day out in the woods turned out a lot like the first one. Couldn't find anything familiar and couldn't find any signs of civilization. Also, the meager water I had brought with me was mostly gone by now. I knew I would have to find a creek just to not die of dehydration. Just like the first day, it began getting dark before I could do much of anything. For a second time, the night was coming down, and I hadn't made any headway getting out of these mountains. I had to find another place to try and hunker down and keep warm for the night. Like the previous one, I knew it was going to be rather cold, so I knew I was in for something that was not going to be fun. There was something different about the second night than the first one though. Although I'd slept badly the first night, it was mostly because of the weather and discomfort. The second night was different. I kept on hearing these sounds, like someone or something was out in the woods with me. I wasn't sure how to tell if it was a person or an animal. I was just a hiker, not a hunter or anyone with that sort of knowledge. Whatever this was though, it seemed like it was sticking around my area for quite a long time. Being so dark though, I was not able to see anything, and I didn't want to call out and reveal my position. I figured if it was someone who could have helped me, they would have known I was there already. At some point, due to the sheer tiredness, I must have dozed off. After that, I slept a lot more soundly than I had the night before. When I finally woke up, I noticed the sun had been up for quite a while. At first, I was relieved to have slept well, but that didn't last long at all. When I got up, I noticed there were some twigs arranged in a formation on the ground, in such a way they spelled out the letter X. That couldn't have been by chance, and an animal wouldn't have done that either. It was a neat letter X that I knew hadn't been there the night before. At that point, I was already dried out from not having any water left over, and although I'd slept deeply, I was still pretty tired. I was worried about how much longer I'd survive out here on my own. The last thing I needed was some strange or crazy person following me. On the third day, I tried even harder to try and find my way out of the area. I wasn't too worried as long as there was light outside. It was incredibly bright out today, and I hadn't seen anyone in the woods yet. I also didn't hear those sounds out with me. After a while, I eventually found a small stream. I was able to get some water to drink, which was the best thing at the moment. I was hungry, but there wasn't much I could do about that. The stream led to a creek, but that didn't help me very much. It didn't seem like I was any closer to finding my way out, and I didn't find my way out again that day. Once again, I had to sleep in the woods, only this time I was much more terrified than I had been before. Despite being scared though, I still managed to drift off. I think not having had any food probably made it a lot easier. I woke up the next morning to something even more terrifying than the X from the previous night. Not far from where I was sleeping, a slaughtered rodent of some sort was lying on the ground. Scrawled in the dirt was a single word: leave. I got up quickly that morning and set off again, determined more than ever to get myself back to safety. I was completely terrified at that point. Obviously, someone didn't want me out there, no more than I wanted to be out there myself. Sometime in what I figured was the afternoon, I was in an open area on the side of a hill. That was when I saw someone emerge from the trees. I thought back to the X, to the rodent, and the message. I was about to leave and run off before I heard them call out my name. Then I heard them yell to someone else. I'm glad I didn't just run off, because it turns out a search party had been put together to come and rescue me. They didn't have the highest hopes because I'd been gone for so long, and were actually pretty surprised when they found me alive and kicking. Fortunately, they brought along some food and water as well, so I was able to fill up on that. I told them about the scary thing I had experienced, but most of them seemed to think I was just delirious from not having eaten in a day. I knew better than that, however. I knew there was someone out there who didn't want me to be out there with them. I just hoped they were happy as I was when I finally left. I came home around 12 a.m. to the house I share with 4 roommates. When walking on the sidewalk, I noticed a man across the street, facing the other side and seemingly doing nothing. I passed by and entered my house, locking the door behind me. I went to the kitchen, passing one of my roommates on the living room couch. The hallway from the front doorway opens into the living room and then to the kitchen. When I left the kitchen, I saw a dark outline through the door window and stopped to focus my eyes. My couched roommate looked at me confused, as in their perspective, I just suddenly stopped in my tracks for no reason. The outer door was open, and the man from across the street was looking in. Then he started jiggling the knob. As I heard the door start rattling, I yelled out to my roommate, "There's a fucking guy at our door!" My roommate got up from the couch alarmed, and we together got closer to the door. I could now see the man's face, pressed up against the door window. His eyes were blank, and he had long, oily hair. His expression made me feel extremely uncomfortable. It was almost as if he was simply staring through us, with no recognition of us even being there. My roommate called down to the basement to make sure the door leading to the backyard was locked. I got closer to the man as he kept trying the handle to go upstairs and alarm my other roommates. When we came back down, the man was no longer at the door. We peered out the window, only to see him standing in our walkway, looking across the street again. Reflecting on this, I'm happy I remembered to lock the door, because often I'd forget, and spend the night with the door unlocked. I can just imagine if the door was the same that night, and he'd stepped into our house. I wonder how the event would have went. I still think about how he probably would have walked through the hallway. My roommate on the couch would see this stranger in our living room. Surely would have scared the shit out of him. Most likely the guy was drugged out by the way his expressions was, and who knows what people on drugs' motivations may be. What is up guys, Blue Spooky here as always. Thank you guys so much for watching, especially if you made it this far to the end of the video. If you enjoyed the video, please be sure to like, share, comment, and subscribe if you feel so inclined. If you do subscribe, be sure to hit that bell button and turn notifications to all so you can be notified whenever I post a new video. I try to post every night, so if you don't feel like doing that, you can come back and check every night around 5:30 p.m. and there should be a video for you. If you guys have any criticism or any thoughts on the stories therein or anything like that, please be sure to leave a comment. I always make sure to read every comment. Even though I can't always respond to them, I do read each and every one and I do enjoy them, so please continue to leave your guys' comments. If you'd like to send in your own story for me to read, please be sure to check in the description below the video. It will have links to my Twitter, Gmail, and Facebook accounts. Send me a message on any of those and I'll try to read your story as soon as possible. If you do decide to send a story in, please be sure to include the tagline, what the name of the story is, what the type of the story is if it has one, and how you'd like to be credited in the description of the video the story appears in. And of course, there's a link to my friend Killer Orange Cat's channel in the description. He lets me use some of his stories in my videos, so if you could be so kind, please be sure to check him out as well, as he's also a good scary story narrator. Overall though guys, I think that's pretty much it for now, so thank you guys so much for watching, and I hope you guys have a great day.